Thanks for joining me. This is James with Three Measures Ministry, and I wanted to bring that up as a point of emphasis because the talk I'm about to have may seem irrelevant at surface level to the point of what I do. The purpose of Three Measures Ministry is it's gospel centered, and some people that watch my videos have heard me teach over the years may not think of my message as being gospel centered, but it really is. Three measures is a reference to a couple things. It's a reference to the theophany when Yahweh came to visit Abraham and Sarah, and she took three measures of fine flour, flour, and she made unleavened bread for Yahweh and the two angels that were with him. And so, starting with that theophany, I'm connecting that to the parable of the woman with the three measures of flour in Matthew 13. And the idea that with that theophany, there was a seed planted, there was growth initiated that we see going from Abraham all the way up through the end. And so that's kind of the core of my message. And I teach different aspects of that. And I don't think that everybody fully understands my intentions when I talk about certain subjects because they're not gospel centric in the typical fashion. In my mind and in my heart, they are. So this is kind of one of those things. I think that this is profoundly gospel-centric, but at first blush, it may seem to not be. The title of this, as you'll see on the thumbnail, is Attention is a Moral Act. And the reason why I wrestled with the title of this teaching for so long, and I finally settled on that just because I couldn't escape it. When I heard Dr. Ian McGilchrist say that phrase, I can't think of a single phrase that has impacted me that much on a visceral, physical level, on a spiritual level, a mental level, all at the same time. Attention is a moral act. And when I first heard him say it, I feel like I instantly understood the depths of those words. But at the same time, I had a deep ignorance of the depth of those words. It's almost paradoxical. And so that whole idea, attention is a moral act, I have really been exploring over the past several months. And for those of you that fellowship with me, have heard me teach in person, maybe you've seen some of the videos on YouTube or Facebook, I've been talking a lot about focus lately. Where is our focus? And I know that for some people it's controversial because I think it's interpreted. And how do I know this? Because people have told me this. I see people's body language when I bring it up. It's implied in their responses very heavily. The idea is that when I'm trying to shift focus, a person's focus away from what they're focusing on onto something else, the implication from their perspective seems to be, I disagree with them, so therefore I want them to focus on what I believe in. In other words, what you believe is stupid, you need to think of other things. And that's not my intention at all. My intention with focus is it's all about priority. So I'm going to give a couple of absurd examples here. And like I said, this whole thing is about focus, but it's going to be profoundly scriptural by the time I'm done. So let's have an example here. Let's say that my wife comes and tells me, hey, did you know that Britney Spears is pregnant? I'm like, oh, cool, okay. I didn't know that. Good for her. I hope it works out. Okay. Now, what are my expectations with that knowledge? That's knowledge, and assuming it's true, then it's truth. It's true knowledge. It's fact. Britney Spears is pregnant. My wife just told me. I don't know if this is true or not in reality. This is just an absurd example. But let's say it is true. Okay, cool. My wife just told me something true. I have knowledge in my mind that I did not have before. Now, if I think about the idea of relevance realization, which is basically realizing, what is the most relative. So when we think of focus, from my perspective, it's a hierarchy. Somebody who is operating in discernment is going to constantly be placing bits of knowledge in a hierarchy of relevance. Some knowledge is more relevant than others. So in the case of Britney Spears being pregnant, how relevant is that knowledge to me? And the litmus test that I see in scriptures and even just in a practical sense, is can I do anything with that knowledge? In the case of Britney Spears being pregnant, the only thing I can do with that knowledge is tell other people that Britney Spears is pregnant. That's it. I am not involved in Britney Spears' life in any way. I don't know the woman. I have no clue. There's nothing I could do. There's nothing I could do. So that's knowledge that goes in my head and goes no further. So that's a very low relevance to me, even if it's true. Now, let's say my wife comes and says, my sister is pregnant. Okay, let's say it's true. So my wife, again, just like with Britney Spears, my wife just gave me a factual piece of information. This is true. She gave me knowledge that's true. So how relevant is it to me? And in this case, it's more relevant because my wife's sister is family. There's a closer relationship there. Okay, I know this person and I know her family. So I need to start thinking, okay, in terms of action, obviously there are things that my wife would be expected to do. It's her sister, right? From my perspective as the brother-in-law, that's going to be a different expectation. My wife is going to be expected to do more, A, because she's a woman and a mother, and so there's common experience there, B, because it's her direct sister. I don't have the same criteria for myself. So I start thinking, okay, how relevant is this information to me in terms of action? And there are things I can do. There are things I can do. I can help participate in buying things for the baby shower. I can provide encouragement to my brother-in-law, because finding out that your wife is pregnant is stressful for guys. I know it sounds crazy, but a lot of us undergo a degree of stress. And, so there are things that I can do in that situation actively myself. Okay, so it's more relevant. Now, if my wife comes to me and says, honey, I'm pregnant. Okay, now we're talking maximum relevance here. In terms of the knowledge that a woman is pregnant, you can't get more relevant than your own spouse is pregnant. Okay? So it's not like with Britney Spears where that information could just go in my head and be like, okay, I have knowledge now. That's true, but I'm not expected to take action on it. No. This is my wife. My wife is pregnant. Not in reality. Again, this is a thought exercise. But let's say that this is true. All of a sudden, the relevance of this knowledge to me personally requires more action than the knowledge of Britney Spears being pregnant or the knowledge of my wife's sister being pregnant in this thought exercise. Okay, this shouldn't be too hard to grasp. And in reality, we have pretty much an infinite gradient of relevancy going from, like, say, my wife being pregnant all the way down to some random person out in the world. And you can apply that same kind of logic to any type of knowledge. And so it's really important when we talk about the idea of attention and focus in terms of knowledge. This is why I think it's so important, the idea that attention is a moral act. So what is morality? Moral has to do with doing the right thing. Morality is a framework for interpreting what is right and what is wrong. And without sounding too postmodern or too moral relativistic, there is kind of a degree of like a sliding scale of morality. Part of it is just the nature of morality intrinsic to it. Part of it is what we make it, being humans who are selfish and are constantly trying to accomplish our own wills against other people. Now, if I think of it in terms of objective morality, then there are things that are always right and there are things that are always wrong. It's always wrong to kill somebody intentionally without a reason. Self-defense, yes, there's intent there. You want to kill that person, but it's to preserve life. Okay, that's different from like premeditated murder. Okay, things like that, they're obvious, they're objective. Okay, everybody can see that, except for extreme psychopaths. And we get into other types of right and wrong that are more situational based. And that's why I think in the scriptures we have the system of judges, because you have the Torah, and you have this idea that the Torah spells out the law of Moses spells out all these do's and don'ts, right? And so the whole idea is that yes, that's true. But if the Torah covered every possible situation that could come up in our lives, it would be an infinitely long book, which is not helpful. So we have a system of judges put in place by Moses with the inspiration of Yahweh through his father-in-law, interestingly enough, that allows people to make judgment calls on those gray areas, the very, very many gray areas of morality that we encounter day to day. And so that's really important to understand. So when we look at the idea of relevance, realization, realizing what is relevant, it's something that we have to, if we're going to say that we're operating in any degree of discernment or any degree of wisdom, we have to be constantly thinking through things like this. There are so many issues that I personally have devoted hours and hours and hours. And when I say this, I'm not being facetious. I'm being literal. Dozens, if not hundreds of hours of my focus and my attention to. And if I was to use the same scale of relevancy that I just used with pregnant women, I was focusing on Britney Spears being pregnant. That was my focus, figuratively speaking. I was focusing on issues scripturally related, things in the Bible and tangential to the Bible that may or may not be true. And of course, I'm under the assumption that they are true. Otherwise, why would I focus so much on it, right? But these are things like with Britney Spears being pregnant that even if they are factually true, I can't do anything. That knowledge goes in my head and then it stops. The only thing I can possibly do is tell other people. So, but I see so many people today, and I could name topics, and if I start naming topics, some of you will come in the comments, some of you will roll your eyes, so I'm not going to name topics, okay? But there are some topics where it's like, hey, Britney Spears is pregnant. Did you know Britney Spears is pregnant? And you just make Facebook channels and your Facebook pages, you make YouTube channels, you post and share memes. Hey, Britney Spears is pregnant. Britney Spears is pregnant. And I see those posts all day long in my Facebook feed about Britney Spears being pregnant. And it's like, cool, even if it's true, why are we talking about this? Why are we focused on this? This is the problem that I'm trying to highlight, and I wish more people would take it seriously. When I talk about focus, I'm not saying that the things a person focuses on are not important. I'm not saying that they're untrue. Maybe they are true. Maybe they are important. But are they as important as other things? Are they actionable? In my opinion, if they are not actionable, if you cannot do something with that knowledge, it needs to be lower tier focus. Automatically. When we look at the idea of relevance realization, that word realization, when you realize something, you have an awareness of it. And it's got the word real in it, realizing. You're making it real. You have an understanding of something that you didn't have before, and in your mind, you are developing a conceptual framework that incorporates that into your perception of reality. You're making it real in your mind. That's part of understanding something. And so when we talk about relevance realization, which is a term that I got from John Vervaeke, he's not the only one, but he's one of the ones that really talks about it. But like when you talk about that idea, it's yes, realizing, understanding what is relevant, what is more relevant, what is most relevant. Britney Spears, my wife's sister, my wife. There's a scale of relevancy there, understanding what that looks like. But it's also the idea of taking what is relevant and making it real, realizing it. If I reify that and I take that abstract concept of just kind of what's in my head as knowledge and I try to make it real by putting it into 3D space, can I do that with certain types of knowledge? And the answer is no, I cannot. I cannot realize those in reality. All I can do is put them in my head as an idea that is real to me in the abstract. That's it. That's as far as I can go. And so if I look at something like, here's another absurd example, attention is a moral act. The things we focus on is a moral act. Focusing on the wrong things is evil. Focusing on the right things is righteous. Of course, that's the root word of righteous, right. And So, if I think of from comic books, if I think of Cyclops from the X-Men, I'm not a huge comic book junkie, but I'm aware. I saw the X-Men movies, and I think I saw the animated series when I was a kid. But the idea is that with his eyes open, naturally, these concussive laser blasts just blast out of his eyes, and he's got no control over it unless he closes his eyes, which, how do they keep from blowing apart his eyelids? Nobody knows. So Professor Xavier had to make these really cool goggles to basically focus those beams and allow him to control them. Because anywhere he focuses his attention, anywhere he looks with the intent of seeing, he's going to destroy. His focus is literally deadly. When he turns his visual attention on somebody without those goggles, it's literally destructive and deadly. And I realize that's a comic book example, but in reality, our focus, the things we focus on, can be deadly in a physical sense, but also in a spiritual sense. There's kind of a trope in different types of movies and literature. You take, let's say, a detective, a homicide detective, and all he does all day, every day is study psychopathic serial killers. And he's immersed in that environment. You see occasionally where those detectives become the thing they've been studying. They themselves become psychopathic serial killers. Why? Because they're so immersed. Their focus has been on that darkness for so long that it overtakes them. And they start to do it. They start to realize it, make it real. That's a real world example. It's an extreme example, but it's a real world example of what can happen when we focus on things that are not relevant to us in a constructive way. Because like I said earlier, knowledge, if I look at spiritual knowledge, the point is spirit. If you think about spirit, the spirit of life enters into somebody. Do they stay inanimate? Like, we don't ever look at a corpse, a dead person laying on the ground, lifeless, immobile, and we say, oh, that person's full of life, or oh, that person's full of spirit. No, because life and spirit are synonymous in the physical world. The spirit moves. Spirit is wind. Spirit is breath. Breath and wind move. They act on the world around them in a very real and tangible way, such as the spirit with humanity. So if I talk about spiritual knowledge, that should be knowledge that moves me, that inspires me to do something in the physical realm. Because if it can't be used to motivate me and animate me in some way in the physical realm, then it's not really spiritual knowledge. It's just knowledge. And I think that this is kind of a misnomer. You get this whole idea with Gnosticism, which is making a resurgence. People don't acknowledge it, they don't admit it, but functionally, the people I'm talking about are by and large practicing a form of Gnosticism. And it's the idea that the more spiritual knowledge you have, the more spiritual you are. But that spiritual knowledge that is usually sought for by Gnostics is knowledge that you can't do anything with in the physical. It goes into your head. Maybe it goes into your heart on some level, but you cannot act on it. And this is why I say that this whole idea of focusing on things that you cannot do, information, even if it's scriptural, even if it's in the Bible, but you cannot do it, it doesn't make it unimportant. It doesn't make it unprofound. It just makes it unlivable. It makes it unactionable. And this is why I think when Yahshua was quizzed on what the great commandment in the law is, he said, I'll give you two. The first is love Yahweh with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second one is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang the whole law and prophets. So notice, commandment. Can you command someone to know something? You can command someone to learn a subject, like book study, or in these days, go on TikTok and watch TikTok videos. That's how we study anymore. You can command someone to do that. But really, when we're talking about commands, we really mean action. And the only type of knowledge that you can do is experiential knowledge. So when we're commanded to love, it has to do with experiential love, not just in our heads or in our psyches. It's bigger than that. Action is expected. love your neighbor as yourself. We have over and over and over again parables and different accounts in the scriptures that illustrate the idea that if you love your neighbor, you will actually do things that show the love for your neighbor. You won't just have warm, fuzzy, emotional feelings about your neighbor and let them starve. So you're doing something tangible. That's why it's a commandment. Action is expected. And if I take knowledge into my head that I cannot do, I can't really call that a commandment. And so that's why the two great commandments, neither one of them is a focus on knowledge. They're focused on action. And of course, the more action you get in terms of how to love your neighbor as yourself, things you can do, actionable items, the more you are able to implement that in your reality. The more information you get on Yahweh's expectations for how we show love to him, the more you are able to tangibly show that love for him. But we have to be able to take the knowledge that we have beyond just abstract mental constructs into something that we can tangibly do. And if we can't do that, the knowledge isn't necessarily bad. It's not necessarily wrong. It's just useless. And so when I talk about the idea that attention is a moral act, the things we focus on reflects our sense of morality. If we are spending our finite, precious time focusing on things that we cannot do to show love towards our Creator via actionable items, or to show love to our neighbor via actionable items, we are focusing on things that do not bring life. We are focusing on knowledge and knowledge, nothing more. It's like the idea in science these days. In the old days, you had guys like Newton, and their whole idea with science was to reveal the glory of creation and thereby reveal the glory of the Creator. For them, science was like a religious function. It was deeply spiritual to those men. Today's scientists, by and large, technology is the point of science. The point of science these days, by and large, is to understand creation so that we can manipulate it, so that we can harvest it as a resource and make more technology. And then Moore's law says that just keeps, doubling down and tripling down and expanding. Okay, what are we doing? We're creating technology for technology's sake. We're not doing anything constructive with it. Artificial intelligence doesn't help me love my neighbor as myself. It makes certain things maybe more convenient for me, and it certainly makes things more convenient for the government, more efficient, but it doesn't necessarily help me love my neighbor, and it certainly doesn't help me love Yahweh. But yet, it's all based on knowledge, and yet it's actionable knowledge. Science is all about knowledge with the intent of doing things, but what's your intent of doing with that knowledge? And that's the whole other thing. Even if I have knowledge that's actionable, what are my intentions? Why am I focusing on that knowledge? Am I focusing on that knowledge for my own, the advancement of my own will? Am I focusing on that knowledge to make money? Am I focusing on that knowledge to genuinely help someone? And these are going to be situational for every person. These are going to be things that each of us has to actually wrestle and weigh. But I think that far too many, and I see this personally, I see it anecdotally, out in the zeitgeist. More and more people are losing sight of what it means to actually realize things that are relevant, actually do them, make them real. Because it's far easier just to put everything in terms of black and white binary terms. Everything is a lie or everything is true. That's not true. I see the conspiratorial crowd posting all the time. Everything's a lie. Everything's a lie. All the world's a stage. Da 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 da. And it's like, okay, well, you need some kind of a framework, assuming that you actually believe those words. You need some kind of framework to identify the truth. And far too many people don't actually have one. So they think they do, but they really don't. They funnel the truth through this prism of their own sense of morality or their own sense of how the world should be. And that doesn't always match reality. And so I think that this is hugely important. When we focus on things, even if they're true, when we focus on knowledge, even if it's true, but we cannot do anything with that knowledge, we are committing evil. And I'm comfortable saying that word in that context. Because evil is basically a failure to do good. It doesn't have to be like in the movies where you've got demons and vampires and werewolves. It doesn't have to be like that. It's just failure to do good, failure to do things that lead to life. That's the scriptural definition of evil. And if I'm focusing on knowledge that does not bring me towards some type of life, then I am committing evil. I'm wasting my time. I am using the time that Yahweh has given me on this earth to serve life to do nothing. And that is an evil. And in my opinion, it is a sin. Is it defined as a sin in those terms in our scriptures? No. But we've got to learn to identify sin as anything that takes away from life or takes away from the pursuit of life. When we think of it that way, we broaden it out. And I've got a teaching called The Nature of Sin that if you want to delve deeper into that, I recommend you watch. To me, having that realization of what actually transpired in the garden, the real sin in the Garden of Eden was not eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil when they were told not to. The real sin was not eating from the tree of life when it was available to them. This is my thing. And this is exactly what we're doing. Adam was not paying attention to the tree of life. His focus was not on the tree of life. And therefore his wife's was not either. So the serpent is able to come into the garden and get Eve to focus over on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And she saw that it was good to make a person wise, which is that what we want, to be wise? Wisdom without life is meaningless. Life without wisdom is still life. Could it be better? Yeah, but it's still life. I think Solomon found this out the hard way. And part of the reason why I have a talk like this is because these are lessons that in my own life I have learned the hard way. I haven't crashed as hard as Solomon has, thankfully, but I've felt the pain of this pursuit in my own life. And when I do a talk like this, I'm endeavoring to help other people avoid that same pain. And you can agree with that or you can disagree with that. But my motivation is always out of love. And I know that that's hard for some people to see. And I'm hoping that at some point, the people that need to see that will. I'm taking time out of my day. I would much rather be in my air-conditioned truck right now, even though it is kind of nice out here. It's pretty hot. The air conditioning's nice. But I'm taking time to get out of my truck and do this talk because it's valuable to me. There's relevance here. And I think that the stuff I'm talking about here, shifting focus, is an action. That is something that we can do. Shifting focus onto what is true and what is beautiful, what is good, these types of things, in a way that fosters life, is the way forward. Focusing on knowledge, even if it's true, that we cannot do, is the way to nowhere. And too many are going nowhere in a hurry. So I'm going to leave it at that. I don't think there's anything else I can say beyond that. Attention is a moral act. Attention is right and wrong. It is good and evil. The things we give our attention to, the things we focus on, the things that we count as more relevant than others. When we elevate something non-actionable to a higher degree of relevancy than something that is actionable, that is an evil. And we need to stop. Thanks for tuning in. As always, Yahweh bless.